Hello, welcome. Today we have Alex talking about his project Floco. Floco, is that how you say it? I hope it.
That is correct. It's Portuguese for flake.
Nice. All right, well, you have the stage.
All right. So, yeah, I'll start with some context. So, let's see. Last February, I started a job at a company called Tulip. They do like what do you? It's like a no-code platform, click and drag, lots of like web interfaces. And when I joined, they had a bunch of Nix infrastructure in place that I guess a previous team member had put in place. These were great. It was like mostly dev shells. Like I think they had 80 dev shells for like 200 engineers, which these were all they used Nix for all those, and I think it was I think that the majority of the staff knew how to like add and remove dependencies to those, but like no one had like in-depth Nix knowledge. Another one they had was like bunch of NixOS modules that were there to do like some deployments. So there was like a little bit of like Nix usage throughout. They had seen cases where like it was really improving their CI system and giving them more consistency. So that was all like super good stuff. Um, they wanted to start trying to build bigger chunks of their projects in Nix. So they had me start on Go modules. They had some Python stuff and pulled out the Dave's Dream to Nix and Mock Nix to do some of these actually, and those really did the trick. Where we ran into a lot of headaches was with the Node.js dependencies, and it wasn't necessarily that like there wasn't tools out there that could handle them. It was more that the tools that we had would do things like anytime you changed a file, you had to like reinstall the full node modules directory, which in our case took about 30 minutes. Um, so on a one line change, you didn't want to wait for a 30-minute build. And beyond that, it was like, you could kind of game it to get like filtering right, or you could try to separate the node modules direction, like directory, the creation of that into like a separate derivation. But like still, the second somebody changed a single dependency, it was like, boom, you got to do 30-minute rebuild. So the idea was try to split the builds for all of these individual modules into individual derivations. So rather than having one, two or three giant derivations that make all these node modules, I wanted to split it into 8,000, which was how many dependencies we had. So that was ambitious goal. I started out doing this with really similar node to Nix tools. I think there's an npm lock to Nix. I took those and kept extending them. Yarn to Nix. I was looking at that and probably 2 months of research through all these and started pulling pieces of those together into like making a tool that really fit our repo. After about a year of that, I had a tool that was like getting used in production and was working. There was just like some UX stuff to get cleaned up, but like as long as there was someone there that knew how to drive it, it was working. Yeah, so later on, wanted to get that integrated with like Dream to Nix, and then also kind of like get the project into a state where it was like more than just me and my coworker Jim understood what the code base was doing. So started a rewrite using the module system. At first, I think the first like week it was like painful, and then started to be able to solve problems with it. 2 weeks in, I was like, yeah, this is really cool. So yeah, that one was great. I think I learned a lot from Dave's repos working on that. I did manage to get like quite a bit of good stuff done. I think the one of the big things that was like really nice about it was um, being able to like kind of like draft an interface in a way that like felt structured and being able to like drop in an implementation. I really liked. There was patterns that Dave had that like worked really well for that. There's not like I wouldn't say, and not that this is not anything that Dave did wrong. It's more like the module system itself, like it's not meant for that exactly. So like this pattern of me looking at this like, a C header that I had my declarations and then my implementation was how I wanted to treat it. But in practice, there's like, you know, doesn't always pan out like that. But worked pretty well. I think this thing is up to having like, I don't know, let's take a look. Let me take a look at the repo. It's got a bunch of modules. It's got a bunch of custom types, extension modules. And one that was important was like, and this is similar to Dream to Nix, like we aren't calling the Nix OS module system. So this used like just straight Nix packages modules. So there's like the warning section, the errors section. There's like a couple of extensions that are specific to Nix packages that are like not really present here. But in general, super, super similar. So I was doing the classic pattern, starting with a modules directory. Got like all these different subsystems here. One of the ones that I ran into pretty early on was handling like, I guess like, okay, so like using the module system to solve different types of problems, like getting it to fit the mold of kind of like a pattern you would have in another language. Like, oh, there's a split of using it as like interface implementation, like a header, or basically to like define an API versus separating that from the implementation was one. Another one was like using it as a type checking system. That one on the surface seems like it's something that it's really designed for, but in the actual like how you trigger evaluation, like feed it a value, type check, and then spit out the checked value. There's just kind of like a lot of boilerplate to get that to work inline. Not to say it's impossible, but like that would be one that would be nice to streamline. Let's see. Another one was kind of like organizing your different modules and getting them to, I guess, behave modularly, if that makes sense. And I know that sounds like a weird thing to say, but I know like Fair, I believe, had brought this up maybe, or maybe it was who was it? We've got another. Oh yeah, Johannes Kirschbauer, I believe, had like brought this up, which was like getting these modules to actually like separate out into isolation can be a little difficult. I guess, yeah. But in general, solved a lot of problems. There was one that I think like was really important, was like there's one usage of the module system that's almost like you're creating global state across multiple files. So like you've got this global config attribute, and you can use this to like, I've got 10 files, but we're sharing variables this way. And like, it looks a little bit like you might see like global state getting handled in some other languages, which is nice. Some things on my wish list was like, this was like using these modules was like worked really, really well if you knew like the actual names of your attribute fields that you wanted. Where it started to get a little painful is if you had like, let's say I wanted to have a dictionary of packages where I could have like arbitrary field names and then the values were like a submodule. Those I got to work using like deferred modules, which man, I think Robert's not here, but thanks to Robert for cooking that up. Could use some docs around those, but that definitely solved this problem pretty well. Yeah, those being able to like basically treat these almost like a class constructor is more or less in the simplest way. This is what I was trying to do with them, was like, I have a list of packages, I have an attribute set, a dictionary of packages, where yeah, you could use deferred modules to like get that to work, and that still allows like a user to apply overrides and like extensions to what the package is. But kind of I guess the call flow for actually getting that to like pan out turns into well, it's a little complicated. So yeah, I guess like on the topic of like getting these modules to work in isolation a little bit better and being a little bit more composable, something I started doing was, rather than having these just be like module files that sit here in kind of these individual directories, was like going in and having these just be like members of like a lib, or like basically just like a file that carried the, basically don't put submodule in front of it, just like have the draft of the thing so you could go and like cherry pick stuff out. That was helping. So yeah, let's see. What could we do with the actual tool? This was, and I was pretty happy about this. The actual like getting started for most projects ended up being pretty simple. Just like drop in kind of a template file. You can call this routine called translate. This was a wrapper around. This was like a little shell script wrapper around Nix that would basically go and like take a package.json file or a packagelock.json, do the lang to Nix thing, and spit out what amounts to basically just like a database of all of your packages or like a giant lock file. Then the Nix module system I wrote would be able to consume that and actually like perform the builds. So here you're doing this translation. This is going to emit that like basically a file that's like package definitions.nix or package definitions.json, and you can just call build. It's magic. All just works usually. So that was super, super nice. I think, when the thing works, it's great and I love it. But yeah, maintenance on the project has gotten a little difficult, and I think like remote debugging on those error messages is like rough. Got like, and I think the big one is like if we could start throwing asserts or throws much earlier in our pipeline, like in our call graphs, like in those modules, like that's a huge help. I think something that would be super, super helpful is like probably me and Dave and a couple other folks that have used this stuff a bunch is like going and writing guides or kind of like intro tutorials for how to use the module system. That is like maybe for writing modules that are not explicitly a part of the NixOS module system. I think there's like crossover. Like I think you might start with these kind of like without the complexity of the NixOS module system to learn how eval modules works and learn how deferred modules work and kind of like how to define your own types and define your own merges, and then you maybe graduate into writing these like the full NixOS modules with like the additional warnings and kind of the patterns they have there. I guess on that note, I did have a bunch of like guides I wrote, which was basically just like, oh, here's a general guide on the module system for like, all right, here's how list of works. These two, like adders of and lazy adders of, those two took me like months to figure out precisely what was the difference between the two of them. But now that I know, it's helped a lot. Yeah, submodule, deferred module. Um, yeah, handling priorities, make override. Yeah, there was some that like order and priority was one that was like a little. Let's see. The docs team is currently looking for help with module system docs. Well, I got some stuff for him, man. I got a couple of things. Yeah, and I think like in an intro guide, like the way that I was describing the module system is like I know that it's like 10 other things, but I felt like to introduce it to someone who was new, I was like, think about this as a fancy merge operator, which I think maybe is a gross oversimplification, but like it was a useful way of like introducing these concepts and like getting people to understand like, oh, this is a way for me to split a giant thing of code, a giant blob into like 10 files, merge it together and have it pretty much work. So yeah, those are good. Let me see. I had a couple of extensions to the module system that I found were really useful, like a relative path type, which I think would be a nice addition. In particular, it's like you don't need this so much for like when you have a Nix file, because we can do dot slash dot or like dot slash whatever, and it'll resolve to the absolute path. Where I ended up really needing it was if I used like a JSON file, or if I needed like, yeah, I mean, if I was dumping JSON or something like that, those were super helpful. Unique lists was one that I added that was nice. More of these like merge, fix up type operators. Those were a lot of fun to like go through and work through those. Yeah, so I mean, we had a ton of good stuff in the module system, but we got to take a pass at some of these docs, y'all. And like way more guides on like intro usage. Like, you know, I'm a freak, and I'd spent like months going and digging and having fun and learning all this stuff, you know, exploring. Wanted to go like, all right, I'm gonna go become expert and know all the ins and outs of this thing. But you know, most people, they don't got the time of day. Most people want to pick up like a framework or a system like that, and usually you're trying to just like solve a problem without reading source code, which is just tough. But I think we could write enough guides and improve those error messages in a way that makes this like a little bit more accessible. One that might be nice is like tighter bounds on like what the module system, its intended use case is, and whether that's like taking type checkers and making them slightly or like, you know, adding these like separations between the things the module system is doing and like the recommended use cases, even if it's like the same underlying system, like using different terms to talk about them in documentation could be helpful. I've got one here that was like basically run type, which was a thing that would evaluate the like the type checker. So like if you have a value and you've got a type definition that you just want to run check, I don't know if anyone's ever tried to do, I know that Dave definitely has, like you load a value into it, you run check, it's always going to pass. You got to like have these, like, you got to like evaluate the module, pull out the config value. There's just like a lot of boilerplate where it'd be nice if you just had like run type check, true false, or that kind of thing. Let's see. What else we got there? Yeah, these were good. Like, and I think the big one, separating out all this, like so much of that stuff that had just been in module files into these helpers, like really similar to the ones that you see in the Nix packages. Helper functions for like, you know, make a enable option, all that kind of stuff. Like separating them out in practice, like ended up helping a lot. There was like a couple patterns of like defining a type, defining the thing that you declare the option type with, and then if it's a submodule, having the deferred form and the regular like module form was good. Let's see. What else we got in here? Okay, like to see like what all did we do with it was you know, internally here, this like builds a bunch of like kind of like bootstraps some dependencies. So we got like Picote, Node Semver, there's a tool called Arborist. This one was like a toy one, was just like which you can build npm with this tool, which is fun. You can build npm and then have it use the built npm. And it all goes in cycles. And yeah, ended up doing kind of a similar thing to what Dave's got, where you have the good old-fashioned giant package set monorepo that has a bunch. At one point, this had gotten up to having like 80,000 members in it, which ran into scaling issues. Lots and lots of eval. I will say the eval cache was a lifesaver. Like that made night and day difference, and there was different stuff like I had places that I was using accidentally copying store paths a million times over and over that I think Sylvan, me and you have talked about that I ran into. But yeah, I ended up getting this trim down to more 8,000, ended up being a little bit more reasonable. Yeah, this is all driven by the module system. I will say like the module system was much, much faster than I expected it to be. Like I think previously I had done a bunch of really lightweight type checking and, you know, more like direct function calls with things like assert or these helper functions, where when I started porting this all to modules, I was thinking like, oh, this is going to get really slow. And I mean, it did a little bit, but like that was never the bottleneck. Yeah, go ahead, Sylvan.
Yeah, just a question, like what is Floco packages actually? Like what is the point
Yeah,
of?
so it was basically like, so this tool I had is like a node to Nix thing. So what I was doing was converting the most common packages, putting in them this like upstream so that like you had like your giant kind of mono repo set. And like the big one was it's in particular for packages that have native dependencies. So like if you need libssl, if you need, these headers or, some stuff like that, a bunch of node packages have like, they'll run a GCC compiler at install time. So you would need to like provide, headers and libs for them. Other ones just needed patches, to get them to like play nice in the sandbox and stuff like that. So like any of those that needed those kind of patches, I was moving up here, so that like this has a giant module config basically that you consume, and it merges with all of your generated definitions, and this will go in and like apply the patches to if it sees that those dependencies appear in your package set, which was that to me was like the most powerful part of the module system. That was like something that my previous iteration was like really not able to do well. Was like you were fine if you were dealing with one package set, but like the second that you had, a couple, it was like you could merge them, but it was like very manual and ugly. And the module system, this made this like dead simple. Like if I had 50 projects, you could just dump them all into eval modules and like boom, it would like merge them all together. There's conflicts and like handling priority order and stuff like that I had basically set up a depth based where it goes and assigns priorities to do tie breaks so that you didn't have to like sync all your stuff. But yeah, that was a problem that the module system solved that I was not going to be able to do otherwise. I tried doing it with overlays. So I had some real complicated overlays. Yeah, and I know the overlay system like the back of my hand now because I was trying to do these like chaining 50 extensions, or should I do compose multiple at a time or chain them, like all the different ways that you could do it to order those. For the overlays, the big one was there was no introspection, so you couldn't see before you merge. There wasn't a good way to like I guess infer the right priority order like without just manually doing it, where the module system was like you had full introspection. And then for that merge operation, where like at first that was the big difference between the modules and the overlays that I found to be super useful. Yeah. But yeah, this has a shitload of packages in it. I will say I more recently have been moving this over to just be a SQLite database instead of like, because right now this is like sprawl of like this has a million Nix files split across the whole file system, which is nice for navigating and reading. But like when I need to do something, for example, like bump the version of this package in all consumers, it's a little different from Nix packages just because like in Node you don't have a unique identifier for every version. You have like 50 versions for some of these, and so like I had to get a little bit more creative about how to deal with like passing these around and like doing an override for particular version numbers across like a large package set. Wrote a bunch of scripts that do this kind of more manually. I have modules that were like consume, like load in the module system, apply a change to all the files, and then dump it back out to disk. That worked well, but I decided to do myself a favor and use a conventional database solution to a conventional database problem, which was a big breath of fresh air. But even still, at the end of that, like you do all your edits, you dump all these back out to disk, and you still need the module system to load them in and actually perform the builds, like feed them into builders. So yeah. And I got like a slick little CLI tool. And I was all, everyone loves making a good little CLI tool, little wrapper. Let's see. It's some other fun ones with this. This is when I was getting into doing extensions to Nix more. This was like really the first time I was learning it, but getting basically in that phase of when you're performing translation and you're generating these module definitions, like actually like using npm inside of built-ins, like, or having semver to be able to do semantic version checking while you're like using these like lock style definitions that feed the module system. So those were a lot of fun. It was a very good time. But was trying to keep, my big requirement was having like, after you've done translation, everything has to work with just like plain old good old fashioned Nix so that people could consume it without any special tooling. So yeah, but yeah, that was like what I did for like 18 months. Mixed, I think like for the things I was using it with at work, it did solve their problems. It did the things we needed it to do. I think as a general purpose solution, it will solve some problems that the other tools didn't, but like this is not your off the shelf solution. Like Node to Nix is still like going to work more often. It's just like, this is where this shines a little bit more is if you have a monorepo, or if you're like doing like active development on a project and you're doing frequent rebuilds, but like there's a little bit more pain and suffering to learn how to get all that infrastructure set up around your project. So, you know, but it was a good time. Learned a lot. Used the module system a lot, probably for like 4 months, was using it every day.
Yeah, nice. Should we get to some questions?
Yes, that would be good.
Nice. So I wrote them down in the Matrix channel. So the first one is just kind of me being curious. Why did you have to use like Atrosoft deferred module instead of Atrosoft submodule? Like deferred module is only a very recent addition, and it has like I think a very limited set of like good use cases. And so I'm wondering if you couldn't have used submodule instead.
I probably should have. So here was why. So like I will say in retrospect, time machine, get to go back, I would probably not have added this layer of flexibility because I feel like that caused some issues. But so one of the reasons, I mean, really the reason that I did it was I have a little doc explaining why and like how to use it. Was, let's say like if you needed to make a change, if you wanted to manually make an override to one package and its package definition, the submodule system was fine. If I wanted to change the behavior of all packages being generated, in order to modify the constructor for a package, the user needed a way to add an extension to what is a package so that as they got constructed, they could tweak this or that. And so one of the things that we did was, for example, like in CI versus doing local development, different kinds of fetchers were like more optimal. So like for local development, when you have your fetcher cache, the built-in fetch tree was great, because like what would happen is if you try to drive a build and you're fetching 8,000 tarballs, which we were, if it fails at the end and you use derivations, those all hit GC. And when you fix your one line change and you hit rebuild again, downloading 8,000 tarballs again. And so the fetcher cache was like huge difference there. That was super nice. On the flip side, when you got to CI, the fetcher cache would prevent you from short circuiting. So like even if you, so here's what would happen. No matter what, you have to fetch the thing. Then you know it's out path. Then you're able to skip a build because you know the hash. So for CI, the trick was no, we want to use derivations here. So that's input addressed, and we can just like boom, skip, or like FOD and skip past all this stuff. So to pull that off, what I was doing with deferred module on like the fetcher field, or the thing that performs fetching, was a deferred module that you could drop in like use derivations or use fetch tree, basically toggle that on and off. There was other ones like to have, like for at work, we would do stuff where we had like a test suite for some projects. And so I could extend the definition of what a package was to say like, hey, when you're processing this one, look to see if there's a script named test, and if there is, add this extra output. So like,
Yeah, I think that's a valid use of deferred module, like by making it changing something for all of the attributes, kind of in that thing. It can be done without deferred modules, but it's not as good without it.
mm-hmm. But yeah, so yeah, for example, we got like these kind of default outputs that you would get. So like you've got your globally installed form of the module, you could get the production node modules directory, you could get a tarball. So for you, one of those things that you could extend on these package definitions was like add additional outputs, like get the test suite to show up or tweak this or that. But yeah, the deferred modules were like the exact thing I needed for that. But like you're right that they are very new, and that made it. I added a lot of complexity to the project trying to do it that way. I will say that I probably, in retrospect, should have just like I don't know, found another way to control those. I could have just done a global field that was like use derivations or don't use derivations instead of doing this wonky thing where like let people tweak the definition of a package. So lessons learned,
Yeah,
but I did learn how to use deferred modules, and I found them to be pretty useful. Like that would be one that like would be nice if we developed more. Like that, like it's almost like extending a class definition or something like that. That
yeah,
is useful, but
yeah. Maybe another question. You mentioned something about depth-based priority resolution. How does that
mm,
work? What is
yeah.
the
So I had a let me see. I have a multiple projects example. So the way this like whole system worked was like, and like imagine a monorepo where you've got your front end code, your back end code, some utility code, maybe some, you've got like multiple projects in your workspace. NPM and Yarn have this concept of like a workspace, which is like at the top level, and you get like one node modules directory that like pulls all the common dependencies across these. Um, the way I was, and I guess like the important thing there is if you make a change to one project, it will update, it knows to like rebuild the other ones, which was important. So like to basically mimic that behavior, um, this was basically just like taking your like lock file and kind of like any manually written dependencies or like any manually written changes, you load those for the current directory. And then let's say I depend on project B, this is kind of like the entry point for that one. So then I would go and load that. This might load another and load another and load another. I had basically tweaked some of these types to detect like the evaluation depth you were at, which you could basically tell by when you do like the merge operation, you can tell the depth you're at based on like how far along in the list you are. Like if that makes sense. So like when I run imports, or sorry, like let's say I have a module that has multiple definitions of a value. I can tell the depth at which it was defined by looking at the index that the definition appears because as the module system collects them, this is undefined behavior, obviously, but like as the module system recurses and collects these, it's collecting them like BFS or BFS basically. And so you could use that depth to assign priorities. Because I mean, like priorities don't mean a
so
whole lot when you're defining your own merge operator, but like you could control the priority of some of those using that.
so it's what is the nesting? Oh, that's the nesting of the imports. That
Mm-hmm.
right, and then which ones take priority? I guess the
The
higher up.
higher level ones, yeah. And so the idea was like, if I am using Lodash and my dependency is using Lodash, I have some situations where I want to propagate my change down, like it follows basically, like override what my dependency is using. You have other cases where you want to not do that, but the default was to. And the reason I mentioned that is this was something you could control. It's not like this was a hard rule that applied always, but like by default, what it was doing was like the root level project being evaluated, their values are considered to be like the ones with the most priority. And as you get further down in your dependency graph, like subpacks or submod, not submodules, but modules that you're composing against, whoever was closer to the root was taking priority unless otherwise specified, basically. But the reason that was important was like you could do this by assigning individual priorities to all those values, but like when you have 50 projects, you're not going to do that. Like I'm not going to go through my tree of 50
Yeah,
projects and manually assign like all
right.
these
And priorities
priorities.
are just like numbers. You don't know what the other numbers are, so
Right.
you might always need adjustment.
Yes, you would need to. And my initial guess was like I could start with an arbitrary high value, like just an absurdly high one for something that I think is going to be low. But then like the problem with that is like you're doing all this manually, and like you can't do that with node dependencies because you have 8,000 dependencies. So you like had to find tricks to like be able to do all this dynamically.
Yeah. So just some quick thoughts on that. It's interesting how that kind of solves this use case, and it's a new way to define these priorities. Although I am a bit worried about it breaking some things because the module system, right, it's not meant to expose this nesting
Right.
of imports. And in fact, the actually something that might break it is the module system deduplicates imports when they get imported multiple times from, like, you could have like a diamond shape import
Yeah.
tree, or I mean an entire uh, graph of imports, and so then the kind of order of imports might not be as well defined anymore. So that's
You're absolutely right, Sylvan. This, yeah. You hit the nail right on the head. Where were you months ago when I was doing I
it's right
figured it
here.
out, and I mean, yeah, no, I know. I did, yeah, I mean, I ran into that and it took me, it wasn't like a showstopper, but it was like, well, I know what I'm doing for the next 2 days. Like I gotta go through and eliminate any cycles in my import graphs, which I never should have introduced any cycles in the first place. This was eating my vegetables, going and cleaning up my import graphs, but they do appear, and so I needed to go through and clean them out. But yeah, I think the big one
Yeah,
was
yeah,
like, yeah, having a way to make some of this stuff less explicit, but it's hard because like as soon as you make something not explicit, then it's like feels like it's doing something you don't understand. It's like it's a balance, but yeah, for the use case I had, there was no way I was going to edit 50 of these files.
yeah. Okay, interesting. Maybe we can uh, integrate. I mean, not integrate that exact same way, but
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that is an open problem with the module system that priorities just aren't that great, and you can have a DAG, but these DAG directed
Mm-hmm.
acyclic graphs, they're also not perfect they all the time. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting. Uh,
You brought
I
up
do
a
want to
good
ask.
one with the deduplicating. That was one that I gamed a lot. Like, because you can just set the file field manually, it takes any key.
Oh,
And so if you had blocked, so like one thing that I got to eventually was like, I wasn't actually assigning file names. I would do a list of modules in a file with phony, like each package would have a file name associated with that package to ensure that you weren't reevaluating the same package definition twice. That one worked, and I mean, I was abusing the way that deduplication worked to like do this little trick, but like that was yeah, this
yeah,
was when I
yeah.
realized what the deduplication was doing to my imports. I was like, this is frustrating, but I could use this.
Yeah. I do want to ask another question by NBP.
Mm-hmm.
He asks, given plugins are able to add built-ins, would it make sense to delegate the dependency resolution to an
Yes.
embedded network-less NPM?
Yeah. So like um I wanted to do everything in Nix expressions because I wanted to. I mean, like, there's a lot of good reasons that I wanted to do it, other than like I thought it could be done, and I wanted to, like, I was willing to go through the extra effort. I also, like, there are problems with npm that made it like the internet that you need to have an internet connection all the time, which made it challenging to use it inside of sandboxes. But like, I later started writing built-in wrappers around npm to do things like generate a lock file or run semver checks and do a bunch of this stuff that I was like not necessarily doing with the module system explicitly, but like doing a lot of this like translation work. And I was using modules for type checking and a lot of this like handling records and this like transformation of data, that like I really should have done myself a favor and done this with some more like built-ins or done this external to the expression system, just because it's not meant for that. So it was like I was constructing a giant system out of like sticks and stones, which is like, it's always a fun thing for a programmer to do, but it is painful when you actually like try to take it out and it doesn't behave how you expect. The built-ins and like kind of like adding additional command, like the plugin system is to like, I strongly recommend it for people. It's like I got so much more done so much more quickly. I like, it was just less painful to get a lot of this stuff done. Granted, like you also like have to know what you're doing. Like, and what I mean is like, don't like corrupt the store and don't like corrupt your caches. So like, it thing about just using Nix expressions and using the built-in stuff is like you're not going to blow anything up. Where like when you start playing with plugins, you get a lot more power and you can like get things done much more quickly. But like you gotta like have been using Nix for like, it's not intro level stuff, and you got to not blow up your eval caches or blow up, corrupt your store or anything weird like that. But yeah, plugin system's great. Strongly recommend. There's like some boilerplate. It's like hard to make your first few to get through the boilerplate, like get the right imports and the right compiler flags. But once you do that, it's like it's a breeze.
Yeah, nice. Another question. You showed in Floco packages these patch version specific package modules.
Yes.
Do these also apply to other patch versions, other minor versions, or do they only apply to like that specific one, or how does that
Yeah.
make sense?
So I had that hierarchy that was like package name, and then underneath that there's versions. If you put a patch in the one with the package name, it applies to all versions. If you then have a subdirectory with a version, that will then apply that patch just to that version. And the way that was resolved was like, first it would check for a version number, load that. There's a setting in that file that's like, should I also load my parent file? So it may inherit, but it could be like if you wanted to block it from doing the one that applies globally to all versions of the package, you could block it, but you could also just like inherit it. But yeah, that was really nice. Recommend that for those, like just in terms of like scaling, there's not like a way to like do batch edits of Nix expressions. And like, since I was doing it was mostly trivial data, like JSON was like a real lifesaver here. So like, I know it seemed weird that like, why was I interested in writing that thing that was like, oh, I can do a relative path in a module. The reason is when you have like a shitload of these files and you can't edit them by hand, like JSON was 10 times easier to edit in batch than like a Nix expression. So like, to get absolute path without like hard coding my home directory and stuff like that, like those were really useful.
Yeah, and so how, or like if you these version specific overrides or modules, how would you define one for all the major versions, like all major versions 2 or all major
Yeah.
minor 2.3? Is
Yeah.
that also supported just by adding 2.3 in there, or?
Yeah, I can show you exactly how it was getting done. Here, let me see. I think ES build might be a good one. No. Well, okay, I won't dig through here, but like I'll have these blocks basically where I was doing version number parsing with built-ins.match in a lot of these. That's painful. I did have built-ins.semver that I had that actually runs a semantic version like satisfaction check. So like I could just do like 4.x or 4.star and test to see is everything major version 4, yes or no. But like since on this side of the translation pipeline I didn't have access to those, I had to like use regex to do all these. Message packer extract. There we go. So yeah, this one, yeah, I did split these out. So yeah, I did start splitting these out. There's the iteration of this that came before that had 80,000 packages. When I told you I ran into scaling issues, I was using, in those cases, I had these files where I was like applying overrides with all these if blocks to say, if you're between this version range and that version range. But doing those range checks with Nix expressions was tedious, and because you had to use regex. I couldn't. There was also like, if you think about it, there's not a simple way to split a version string into integers and do comparison. You can. I know that you can, but like, come on, it's a pain in the ass.
It uses like JSON conversion.
Yes. So like,
yeah.
Since my issue was already scaling, doing semantic version parsing with built-ins.split and built-ins.from JSON to get integers and then do range comparisons was like, I don't think that was going to help my scaling problems at all. But y'all, let's get built-ins.semver in upstream. This is like actually would be so fucking useful, not just for me. Where's Dave? Dave's gone. Dave.
Yeah, he had to leave
I know Dave's here in spirit,
past.
but if I could have, yeah.
Yeah, he will talk to you afterwards when he sees this.
Yeah.
Is built-in.semver, does that exist anywhere, like as a third party or PR, or is it only an idea right now?
Oh, no,
it does exist.
I have it. No, it exists. Here, I could. Let's do. So Floco Nix is a wrapper. It's literally, I made a Nix plugin and I made a little wrapper script that runs Nix with exec and -- plugin files to load the plugin. All right, let's do it.
Maybe we can. Another question. Meanwhile, is Floco production ready? Would you recommend companies to use it?
I used it at my old job, and we used it. It was like really good to use there, but like we were able to use it because me and my coworker Jim like built it, and we were there to drive it. Or like we knew the things that it could do. We knew the things that it couldn't do. When something would misbehave, it was like, yeah, we knew that wasn't going to work because we didn't implement that feature yet. Because it was basically just the two of us doing this, and he was doing a lot of CLI stuff. I was doing like all these modules and stuff. Like I did my best to write as many guides as I could, like, but I'm one person. So I have been very excited that like more people have been picking it up and like starting to help. And so like thanks to Fair and Dave and Johan, like people that have been picking it up and helping file issues. I really appreciate you. Thank you. Keep doing it. But I think it'll get there. But no, like today, like I wouldn't use it in production. It's pretty fucking close. But yeah, I mean, let's talk in like 6 months, or especially if I could get some people helping contribute on this thing, because I don't work at that place anymore and I'm not using it I mean, this used to be kind of a full-time job making this, and so since I'm not there anymore, I'm still plugging away at it, but it's a hobby project now.
Yeah, so it's there. Might need maintenance. The ideas are written down and implemented now.
Yeah, and I will say, like, it's checking out. I mean, I'm maybe being less fair to it than I should be. It solves a lot of problems. And like, if you're, there you go, built-ins.sembear, baby. We got you. We got a couple others.
Nice.
Let's see.
I see npm built-ins. Oh,
I think this works. Oh, I'm not in JSON. Boom.
wait, is that pure?
Yeah.
How is npm like
'Cause,
deterministic for
and
versions?
no, it emits in your lock. So if you locked this, it writes the resolved version number in your lock. So when you re-resolve, like let's say you run Nixflake update, it's going to re-resolve your version string, and that gets written to the lock file. So as long as you don't run Nixflake update, you're going to keep using the version, which it works exactly like npm does in that sense, which is super nice. That one was nifty. That one was like the inputs, the fetchers, like if anyone is currently doing that thing where you do like you fill in a phony hash and you run a derivation and then you make a fixed output derivation, do that with an input. That's what the inputs are for. this is what they do, and they're really good at it. And they like, yeah, I wish I had done that thing with the fetcher like the second month instead of like the 12th month. I could have saved myself a lot of headache. Yeah, we got all kinds of fun built-ins. I made all kinds of other built-ins, like whatever. But so yeah, that's just like doing the npm registry fetch.
Okay, that's definitely impure.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm doing a network fetch. This one's nifty.
Yeah, although I mean, wouldn't this break the evaluation cache? I mean, it violates
those
purity, and
ones,
therefore should also.
Yeah, those ones specifically, yes. Which is why I would not contribute those upstream because they don't belong there. Because this was for me when I was doing translation, and I was already running in impure mode, and I'm just trying to like emit JSON or Nix expression for the user. The semantic version parsing is pure, and that would be a huge help, just like selfishly for me, because I'm trying to parse sembear so much. But I already got this sitting in my tree, so it's kind of solved problem for me. But having it available for everybody, I could then do that parsing or be able to handle that processing on the other side of the translation fence. All the Dream to Nix people, all the Haskell to Nix, all the pip to Nix stuff. Like, I don't think that this was just one that was like useful to me, perhaps. But yeah.
Well, what kind of version strings does it implement? Is it the node specific ones? Because Haskell might have different.
Yeah, so it does the semantic, like the sembear spec. The range parsing is the one that's like here. And actually, let's pull up the before I say this. Let's pull up the old sembear spec. I don't know if the sembear spec includes the range parsing. The range parsing is really like the more interesting thing. Okay, they do not. They do not include the range parsing as a part of. But like, okay, npm does stick to the spec like as written on the actual version strings. The range parsing is the one that is like npm specific. I will say I believe that those range parsing characters are consistent all the way back to like Ruby gems. I think was probably one of the early ones doing it. But yeah, I think npm, Ruby, Haskell, Python, npm might support some additional ones that the other ones don't, but I do think that in cases where they overlap, I think it is consistent. So like, for example, this one is...
Yeah, there is this in Haskell. That works too.
Yep. Oh, you can
Yeah, that's
Why would you? That's like nonsense, though. What does that mean?
I would have to check, but I think it's something like use any version that has kind of the same API boundaries as that, but you can use the latest one among those or something like that.
Oh, okay. So that's just for us. That would just be this. So like, what this one means for in Node universe is, give me something that is at least 4.16.7, and it is compatible with that version. So it'll never bump you to 5, but it can keep bumping minor version. So this is equivalent to greater than or equal to 4.16 and less than 5.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I can. I mean, we have Elko right here as well. I can see some problem with upstreaming Node.js specific stuff, but if it is like a more general standard that might be used by many like language frameworks, then might be doable.
Yeah, I mean, we added stuff like TOML support because it was useful for processing cargo .toml. So yeah, we can add stuff like that if it's kind of generically useful.
Yeah, and I mean, you know me. I know how to make plugins. So if they don't want to, if it doesn't go upstream, that's fine. I can keep doing it over here. But yeah, having it on the other side of that translation fence would be like, kind of like we were talking about for handling those like overrides based on version. Like that gets significantly simpler if you can just like do a little semver check. So yeah, that would be dope. Yeah. So I mean, I think module says this was a crazy project though. I learned so much. I went through, and okay, before I got to using modules, it was like trying to use overlays and this whole complicated overlay system. And a couple months into doing that, I like looked at the module system again and was like, fuck, I'm re-implementing the module system. Like I'm doing the thing. And I used Yance for type checking, which there's a lot of stuff from that I actually really like and would like. There's, I wouldn't use that type system as is, but I think there's like some nice features from that could potentially be useful in the type checking that we do in the Nix packages modules. Like specifically that, like it was very easy to run a type assertion. Like I could basically just do like, if this is a GitHub rev, and pass it the string, and it would do all the regex checking. Was pretty nice.
Yeah, nice. We are about out of time.
That's cool. My voice is starting to hurt. So
yeah, thanks a lot for talking about this. And then
thanks, y'all.